And welcome back to everybody online and also to everybody here in the room. We're going into our second panel discussion here, which is about people. How can we place people at the heart of making and staging work in public space and best support diversity and new voices in our sector? How can our work not only speak to but involve audiences and enable individual creativity? There's an awful lot to unpick there. Okay. If you want to ask a question or make an observation, that would be absolutely brilliant. We would really welcome it. Don't leave it until right towards the end, because what always happens is that nobody wants to talk at the beginning, and then at the end lots of people want to ask a question, and there simply isn't time for them. If you are online, please submit your question through the chat. If you would like to ask a question or make an observation from the room, can you raise your arm, and you will need to get a microphone, otherwise the people online won't be able to hear you. Do wave your hand around quite a lot, because sometimes it's a bit hard to see here. Listen, I've got a really brilliant panel of people with me here. Either through the QR code, if you are online, you will be able to look at all their biographies. I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing people. Many of them will be familiar to you anyway. If you're in the room, you should have had a piece of paper on your seat. Each of them is going to talk for 3 to 5 minutes right at the beginning, and then I hope that we will have a discussion. So, just to go down the line, we have Vicky Amadume from Upswing, who I'm sure you all know. We then have RJ Chahabra from Nacolt and the Mellor Partnership, Pax Nindy from Global's Carnivals, Liz Pugh from Walk the Plank, and Alicia Smith from Culture Liverpool. Vicky, can you start us off?
Yeah. Hi. So I'm Vicky Amadume from Upswing, a contemporary circus company. I'm going to talk a little bit, but I'm going to try not to answer all of the questions that have been laid out, just point at the politics of what Upswing stands for. So Upswing is a contemporary circus company, and we aim to tell new stories in extraordinary ways. And that's because at the heart of what we do, there is a desire to support people to tell more powerful stories about themselves and their communities. Being circus artists, we often find ourselves working outside of traditional cultural venues, and that suits us just fine. Circus and outdoor art often sit most comfortably when they're not in alignment with the dominant cultural infrastructure. We are passionate about supporting people like us, people outside of the mainstream art sector, to claim cultural space. Circus is an art form that has a really huge, broad appeal, but it requires a high degree of specialisation. And I think over the years, Upswing's work has developed as an idea of circus as a creative toolkit, one in which we endeavour to open the toolkit up to our participants and co-creators in a number of different ways. And I think the best thing is to give you an example of one way of working. A great example is a project that we have just recently come to an end of called Seasons. And this was a 2-year project in Brent in local libraries. The only boundary about that project was the context working in libraries and the budget that we had to work with. Within the project, we worked with a group of local children to define and develop an idea for a new piece of circus that was driven by their interests, concerns and creative choices. We allowed ourselves to be led by the children, putting our creative toolkit at their disposal. So our professional circus artists and our creative team, really in service of their imaginations. It was complicated and it was brilliant, and we ended up somewhere that none of us could have imagined at the start, and it was truly a product of the kind of creative imaginations that were in the room. This is not new, but I think it's important for us to talk about what it truly means to be collaborative and to work with co-creation in our practices. Something that Kully pointed to earlier, where power sits and how you enable people to take power in creative processes. Essentially, Upswing's work has often been about building common ground between highly specialised professional artists and the people that we work with, the non-professional artists that we open up and invite into our creative processes, or occasionally go into communities to work with our creative toolkit to enable them to realise something that they couldn't without the skills that we were able to provide. It's worth noticing that a lot of this work, particularly the project that we've just finished delivering in Brent, is work that takes a long time to develop. It takes a long time to build trust. It takes a long time to find a language and a meeting point and a common ground for people who are coming into a space with disparate practices and find a shared goal and a way of working. And I think this kind of co-creation, participatory community practice requires sustained support and sustained commitment.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon to those of you who are here. Good afternoon to those who are online. Thank you very much for having us. I want to start by thanking 101, Simon, Danielle, all of you technical crew there, Liam, Bill and others, in making this fantastic creation space, part studio, part film set. From green rooms for the speakers to big screens, delicious lunch, and as Lynn has said, hybrid is the way. A warm welcome to you all who are watching from your homes, your offices, or in cafes. And thank you to those watching online. And also a thank you to those who will be watching in 2072, 50 years from now. Let's hope we're not having these same conversations. And you'll be looking at us as dinosaurs, potentially. Also, really, really important to thank you, David Micklem, for the time and the invitation. You allowed me to speak from the heart. No barriers, no judgment. You just allowed me to speak, and I really appreciate that. I'm Ajay Chabra. It's a bit of a tongue twister, and the company that I work for, I've founded, is called Nutcut. Nutcut means mischievous in Hindi. We work in the outdoors. We make different scales of work. The biogs are all on the website, so please feel free to have a look at that. As a result of Nutcut, what we discovered that we were working in places which had little to no cultural activity around the country. So we've created something called the Mela Partnership. And interesting to see Michael Gove focusing on Wolverhampton, which is where Simi grew up, and Sheffield, Thamesmead, where I grew up. These are the places that have really, where we go back. Our heart is in those places. We see no change, and we're looking for that change. So those are the places that I think where many of our artists and colleagues have not particularly felt at home, we felt really at home at. So we enjoy working there. I just wanted to welcome the recognition the report gives to Mela and Carnival. There's a long way to go, but I think it's really important to say thank you for recognising that. Phase 1 is to recognise it. Phase 2 is to start think of next steps. And I'd really encourage us, and those of you who are engaged in this conversation, to come together. And if that can happen through the Mela Partnership and other partners, we'd really welcome that. In 1 hour this morning, I've heard the word Mela more times than I've heard the word Mela in a decade at these sorts of conferences. And I don't say that lightly. I mean that. It's a word that doesn't naturally appear in these forums. So once again, thank you. This really is a decade of change. There are so many changes that lie in front of us. Post-pandemic recovery, the way we look at development and communities coming together, how we recover from those communities, monarchy, and all sorts of other things. So this report is really, really timely. And as David said right at the beginning, it is a thick report, but please, those of you who are engaged in these words, in these stories. Take your time and please read it. The three things that I'm particularly interested in, and as Lynn said, there's a lot to cover in a very short amount of time, but I hope we can continue these conversations. And the three things are, first, arts leaders. Where do our leaders come from? How do our arts leaders embed themselves into the communities that they serve? I've heard the word I more times than I've needed to during the course of the day. Where is the word we? Where do our leaders come from? How much do they understand their communities? I published a blog this morning which talks about leadership. It just provokes the idea. The second thing I'd like to hear and talk about is nuances. We talk about plastic pigs that brings joy. I'm a great fan of plastic pigs bringing joy to communities in Hull and other places. But my focus is on thinking about my Muslim and my Jewish communities who might just ask me a question about what the story of that plastic pig. And it's just worth thinking about how curation happens. Who makes those decisions? And something Kully talked about earlier. And finally, class. I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. I shouldn't be doing the things that I do. When I look back on the last 20-odd years, Kully spoke about this at the launch of Leeds 2023 at the British Library last week, that some of us grew up in the shadow of factories, and we were factory fodder. Working in the arts is a privilege, and it's an honour. So thank you all, thank you 101 for having me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Wow. Greetings. My name is Pax Nindy. I'm from an organization called Global Carnivals. We breathe carnival. So I'm going to ask you to do one thing, even people at home. When I say matuna, you say maviri. Matuna carnival I've ever seen. They do the river, they do horses, they do all sorts of things. And then we also do things like, at the moment I'm actually consulting for St. Paul's Carnival. I've done Hackney Carnival. And then also we produce certain things with money, without money. Like, for example, I launched this in December. This is a booklet, the first guide read on carnival. There's about 161 carnivals from UK carnivals. So some of the stuff we do with money, some of the stuff we don't do. But I think in terms of people, what I was going to say to you is if you go to Trinidad, they challenge you that they are Trinidad Carnival is the, what do they call it? The best, I can't remember, the greatest show on earth. If you go to Brazil, they say that in Portuguese. If you go to Abuja, they say that in African language. And if you go to Nice, they say that in whatever language they speak. So which means people believe this is the greatest show on earth. But all I can say, we are talking about people here, just like what I did with that example of, Matuna. Carnival could never happen without people. So I'm actually sitting in the right panel. I'm not going to go any further, but I'll go on that. But the other thing I was going to say is we got fed up with COVID. So we decided we can't just sit at home. The carnival, when Nottingham Carnival happens, about 93 million whatever comes into the economy of London in 2 days. Right. Now, when this COVID thing happened for 2 years, I was sitting there thinking, it's quite interesting because that 93 million, not even $1 million that goes to carnival. So when they say COVID has killed carnival, no, it hasn't. It's killed the businesses that benefit from it. Sorry, I'm done.
It's tricky, isn't it, following Pax and Ajay. So, hello, I'm Liz Pugh, and I'm creative producer for Walk the Plank, and I've just been sitting thinking about that journey from awestruck spectator to willing participant to silent witness bearer. And I'm just going to talk about a couple of projects to get our juices going around people. We have made work in unexpected locations, but they are often locations where people already are. We are known for making spectacle, and we've often worked with large-scale casts, large numbers of people as performers. We've worked across whole cities, like Derry in 2013, the first UK city of culture. We also, I would like to think, sometimes make very small but equally impressive work. So 2 weeks ago in Knowsley, in a tiny wood in the back of a neighbourhood, we made a little fire garden, and most of the people that saw it walked there, and it was in their neighbourhood. We make one-off civic celebrations, and we build creative teams by recruiting locally and thinking about legacy from the start. And in Cyprus, in Paphos, we worked, I was thinking about the creative team for the European Capital of Culture opening for Paphos. Paphos is it was called a city of culture. Actually, it's a tiny town without a huge arts community because mainly people have to leave. But we found a writer, a designer, a composer, choreographer, actually not the choreographer, costume designer, and other people. And my job there was to be the person who helped glue that team together and give them the confidence to do something that they had not done before on a scale that they had not done before. They had all the skills. They just didn't have quite the same level of experience of working at scale. So that role we have to create space for others to shine when they step up, and whether that's about scale or the moment. And then, as Ruth mentioned, we're now working on this project, Green Space, Dark Skies, 20 locations across Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland and England. And we're inviting people to gather at dusk in places of geo-environmental significance. Our partners include Siemens, the national parks and the AONBs, conservationists, artists, environmentalists, National Trust, CADU, places and mainly people. We're calling those people, and you can all become one. You can sign up from now, and the website is greenspacedarkskies.uk if you want to have a look. Those 20,000 participants that we're calling Luminators, at least 25%, hopefully 75% of them will have never had the chance to do something in a wild space at dusk. And we are hoping to build better guardians of those places for the future. There is no show. There is some artistic practice as part of the engagement process, and we will be creating a series of films. There is no live audience. The only way to do this is to be a participant, and that's partly because we're trying to discourage people with, if you've looked at Walk the Plank's website, you see, big fireworks shows, or you see really big scale stuff. And so we actively don't want people to come expecting anything like that. We're only going to tell the people who sign up as participants where we're actually going to work, and there won't be very much to see. It is all about making a journey with other human beings into a place. There will be handheld lights that have a bit of technology in them that means we know where they are and can activate them in ways. But actually this is a project about people as participants who bear silent witness in places. And I think that moment when, imagine 1,000 people are in a beautiful place, and half of them have never gone into the countryside before. And let's be clear, a lot of the budget is going on transportation, because actually one of the main barriers to get into some of these places is the rural transport network and the fact that there's no buses. And if you're a young person in Ystrad in Wales, you can't get into the Brecon Beacons because the buses only run once a week or whatever. But imagine that we've taken 1,000 people into that place, and some of them have worked with artists on the journey to be there, and others turn up on the day, and then as dusk falls, other people's lights begin to shine, as does your own. And then there will be a moment, because this project is called Green Space Dark Skies, there'll be a moment where all the lights go off and people are stood outdoors. All they can hear is the sound of wind, probably rain as well, knowing Britain. And that moment of being in a wild space, there's no show, nothing massive is going to happen. But that moment of being connected with other human beings in a place with the skies above, that's what it's about now. Thank you.
Hi everybody. So just reflecting really around and just listening, and it's just great to be here. But I'm sure there seems to be a common theme about witnessing people and as they engage, and I think that's really important. And then reflecting on what I was going to say today, for me, it's kind of what for Culture Liverpool and my team and how I work. well, how do people actually are a part of that, really? And so it's kind of like, for me, it's very much about people and place. It's working with partners with shared objectives, shared challenges, and using arts and culture to address and develop and create new ways of bringing positive change in action. And that could be lots of different partners. We talked about planning before, and actually, you know, that's what I do within my job as well, really. But I always come from a cultural lens and how we can actually look at how we can work with people. I'm interested in cultural-led regeneration and how the creatives can actually be part of that, and people can be part of leading that regeneration in their neighbourhoods or communities. And also I'm particularly interested in creative communities and placemaking, and with an emphasis on supporting co-production and ownership, really. And I think that's what makes meaningful work for me, is that it's a cocktail, it's an ingredient of lots of different partners to come to the table with a shared objective, and actually then there's a creative output at the end of it. Successful partnership, I think for me it's about how we tell the story of a place, our neighbourhoods, and how the communities take a journey of learning and development to embrace and promote what makes them unique. It's about finding that USP of that place and the people that live in that place, really. I think that's what's really important and exciting, really. And it's looking at how we can look at joint solutions, and then we use culture as the glue to connect all of those aspects of it. What makes successful our participation projects as well for me is about taking risks, it's being innovative and capturing thought-provoking high-quality artistic work and placing it in different platforms that challenges and captures people's imaginations. We talked about before, you know, just bumping into culture, and I think that's what's exciting as well, or inviting people into a space, a disused space that we've not used before, and that's exciting. I think opportunities about legacy, that's always been part of what we do, so it's kind of not about parachuting into a place, it's about actually looking how we can share experiences, develop that programme and actually embrace that, and then there's ownership. In the last 2 years, over lockdown, and we've been speaking to lots of different artists and working, and I've done 2 different major regeneration projects in 2 different neighbourhood areas, south and north of Liverpool. The first one was a project in an area, Liverpool 8 area, and it was with Princess Boulevard, and I've sent a link, there's a link on by my bio that will take you to this page to give you a little bit more information about it. But interestingly enough, because I think we talk about the Arts Council and that, this is about looking at different funding streams as well. This was a highways programme, a whole regeneration programme for highways. So the money that was spent on culture came from that highways package. And it basically, we were brought in to work with, as part of the creative consultation, really, and really work with people on the ground, demystifying what was happening to this new highways programme and what was happening to that, but also for communities and people to actually put their handprint on it. And if you walk along that Princess Boulevard now, there is public realm, it tells a story of that area, and I think that's what's really good, to capture that. And we looked at themes, and we spoke about what are those themes that we want to see. And I think everybody went on a journey, from the suppliers to the contractors, but the impact is there, and that's a legacy, and that work is still happening, really, which is important to me. The second project, which is very much recently, and you know, again, a lot of these companies are mentioned in the report. We worked with Reimagining, a fantastic company, and their bridge programme. And I started talking about this before lockdown and how we could work, and we started to work within another area in the city, in the north of the city, and it was being regenerated, and how we could really have that creative input by the residents who lived there, and then tell their stories. And as soon as I spoke with the company, I thought this is ideal, really, in kind of how we can start to unpick and bridge that gap, and that's what the project was called. Obviously, it's in the actual report as well. So again, there's a lot more information, and we might talk a little bit more as we get into conversation about that process. But the important part of all of that was about it was people who made it work. And it was people who actually brought that piece of work together, from the artistic company to the residents to the shopkeepers, and how we started to talk about that area and how we could all work together. Another part of Culture Liverpool's work and how over the last 2 years, and I'm sure other people have looked at, is the people who actually make the work. And what we did was support those people who made the work. And we, you know, again, and we looked at, because it was safe to do so, as we were talking here about the public realm and space, and that was really important to us. And throughout all the work that we've done, you know, behind all of those things and those spectacles really are people. And also, interesting enough, a lot of the work that we do and the journey that we've been on since European Capital of Culture is about the people who live there, as well as bringing people in and showing off our city. But actually, the residents are always left there. So it's kind of, we really want to put the handprint on and bring them on that journey, which I think is important. And also festivals, and we've got lots of different festivals that use lots of our outdoor space and talk to lots of different other communities and different people. Well, there's a real diverse voice of a city. And I just think, the last thing I wanted to say, and it was just something that we were talking about here, that, you know, we talk about spectacle, and I think spectacle is important, but it is the journey that people experience, either that being participating or actually being a spectator, that each person takes something away with them. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Vicky. I thought, you know, so many interesting things that have come up from what you've all presented to us. But I just wonder whether a really quick way into some of this would be, could you, each of you, if we go down the panel, just give me maybe 2 or 3 markers that you think are indications of successful participation? What is it that you think needs to be there, needs to be in place, that you need to think of in order to make these projects successful and satisfying and meaningful for those who you're working with? Shall we begin with Vicky at the end?
I think there's something about being really, really clear about what it is that you're doing. You know, I think we have interchanged the idea of participation, where somebody has defined a space for people to operate within, and they're working within that space, versus the idea of being active and having agency to make decisions and change the direction of how something functions. And I think quite often we see situations where people are talking about one thing, but they're branding it as the other.
Yeah. Okay, that's a very good answer. I mean, in some ways that comes back to what you were talking about, Liz, doesn't it? About that idea that you were very clear about what the project will be and what it will not be.
Yeah.
Ajay?
I'm really interested in rites of passage, and always have been. You know, these moments in our lives that mark events. And to be invited to somebody's funeral, for the family to invite you to somebody's funeral who may have worked with you once, to be invited to an Eid party, or a Diwali party, or a Christmas party, or a birthday party. You know, one can't quite quantify or evaluate that. Yeah. But that, to me, you know, and you can't go to every single one, you know, no. if you're working with lots of people. But I think when people become your own, and that's why I think embedding yourself in places in which you work, and becoming closer is really, really important. And it's not easy. You know, it's not often easy, but I think rites of passage and moments in transition in people's lives, if one is invited, is extra special.
But because that's about real connection, isn't it? It's not about actually having just kind of parachuted into somewhere and kind of made a project and then moved on to the next project. It's about, I guess it's about what we were talking about earlier when we were talking about legacy and what, you know, and what that legacy means. Whether, in fact, it's about how people feel about the particular place they live, or indeed about those personal connections. Yeah. Pax, do you?
Can you repeat the question for me, please?
What I was asking was about what do you think are the markers of successful participation?
I ask you that on purpose because that's what Carnival is.
Right.
When a carnival comes, it's actually a mark of what's actually happened with the whole community and so on. And also, I think going back to Liz's point, people need to understand what it is they are creating, why are they creating it. I'll give you an example. We did a collaboration with people said that will never work. There is an old English carnival called Bridgewater Carnival in Somerset. What they did is completely different from what the other people do in Carnival. Then we got those to work with shed makers in Isle of Wight. We did a massive thing in the Millennium Stadium. When you came there, it was just outdoor work. There was nothing to do. This is Carnival, street arts, and so on. I would like to see more work like that, where the people are working from the different areas, but it's just a piece of work. I can't say, oh, that's Carnival, oh, that's outdoor work, oh, that's street arts. So I think for me, that's sort of something that needs to be encouraged and needs to keep on happening.
Okay, in fact, maybe actually we just shouldn't box these things off, and that we need to have fluidity of definition. Sometimes, of course, funders themselves make that quite hard. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Liz, I mean, you talk very eloquently about the project, but do you have other things that you would say this is a marker of something that's been successful?
I think there is something about being clear about the contract between the artist and the participant or the group of participants or whatever, because lots of artists should have and can have the freedom to work in a number of different ways, but let's not wrap up one thing as another. But then I think for me there's something as well about the progression. You might start as someone who only wants to give up a day to come in and show off the thing that you've been working on your own in front of some other people, and you want to take part in the thing that happens on the night, but you don't want to be part of a process that requires you to give up every Saturday, every Sunday, and a lot of evenings. That's okay, as long as the artist knows that that's all you're going to give up, and as long as that's fine. But actually, next time, you might want to do something a bit, might want to do the next bit, which is, well, I got involved that time and I quite enjoyed it. What next? And I think one of the problems that we all suffer from is, project by project, it means it's hard to commit to that journey that people want to go on, that we go on as participants or spectators or whatever. So I think we have a responsibility to think about what next. After this project is finished, what next? And I suppose just thinking, because I know Kate's here, in terms of Activate and the work in Dorset, when we've been thinking about the Green Space Dark Skies project there, working with an arts organisation that is there and is looking after people before the project and looking after them afterwards is really, really important.
Yeah. Looking after people, I think one of the things that has very much come out of today, about those ideas of listening to people and looking after people. And I do sometimes think in the arts that actually we're not as great at doing either of those things as maybe we think we are. Yeah, absolutely. Alicia?
One of the markers, I think, is about different partners that you're working with. And I think we talked about language quite a lot here. And actually, different partners have a different language. So, for instance, it might be planning, it might be highways, but then it might be the artist. And I think it's being sensitive to the needs of the group that you're working with. I agree with you kind of around that whole journey thing. But Liz and I were talking, I went to see the piece in Knowsley at the Fire Garden. We were talking, and I think one of the markers is really about the people and the curiosity, really, and how them coming along to see a piece of work. And I think that's when you've got it right as well, just that whole...
And sometimes not telling them too much in advance what's going to happen. So maybe there's something about the care around that.
I think so. And then the other thing for me and the work that we're doing in Culture Liverpool is the next step. So with the Bridge project, that was, even though we started with a spectacular and underneath all of that was a lot of a lot of work with different people and the neighbourhood areas. But what comes next? And that was the starting point. So the spectacular was the starting point. So sometimes you build up to that and then da-da, fireworks. But actually that was, we're going to start big, but actually we want to really grab your attention and we're really going to work with you. And you know, the groups that were working on that are actually going ahead and doing other things, but we're investing in that.
I was quite interested with Vicky when you talked about the idea that with circus practice and about it perhaps not being part of those dominant culture and dominant narratives. And that would seem to me to apply to the work that you're doing, Pax, and actually everybody probably in terms of art in public spaces, that it simply doesn't. There can be disadvantages with that, as I think we've touched upon earlier, in the way that like funders see it, because it's easier to fund a building doing their production of private lives than it is to fund this work. But I'm interested about, are there advantages of that if you are not part of the dominant kind of culture, and are there in particular advantages about how it will be seen by participants and by communities who perhaps might think that the dominant culture is not for them?
Yeah, I mean, the libraries project that we've just finished is a really great example of that. I think if we'd invited a group of children to come work with a theatre company, it would have been harder to reach the diverse group that we reached than if we say, come and work with a circus company and help us make a new piece of circus. That, I think there's an immediate kind of recognition and understanding of what that contract might be that might not be present if you said, like, come work with a visual artist or a spoken word artist in the communities that we were reaching out to. I think kind of pointing back to Liz's point about what next, one of the things that we really recognise as an organisation, we don't have our own building, so we don't have a space where we can invite people to and kind of maintain that care with. So we often partner with organisations that are based in an area that already have sets of communities that they're working with and want to prioritise and build a relationship with. And we use our creative practice to help them strengthen the relationships with those communities. The libraries project in Brent was originally set up as a 2-year project, but we're now looking at how we extend that, because there is a whole kind of cohort of young people now that want circus as part of the cultural offer that they have there. And we're thinking about how we enable them to continue that activity. So, long story short, I think, we have an advantage in certain ways because we can be fleet of foot, we have that kind of cultural recognition. But it is challenging because we have to find the right partners who are willing to take a risk and give us the time and space to really develop our practice in an embedded way. Otherwise, it just doesn't work.
Adriana, do you is being outside of the mainstream, not part of the dominant culture, is that useful in any way?
I mean, Pax made a really interesting point when he asked you the question again about participation, and it just struck me that we don't have these types of conversations in these types of forums. My mark of participation, or wherever we sit in all of in the kind of complex culture jigsaw, is the fact that people come. So we're working right at the bottom. Not even the ladder doesn't even exist. We're not inviting people to come back to see another show or engage in another activity. We're working with people who have little to no cultural activity. So that by the very fact that they've come to where we've invited them or where we've created together is, we sometimes forget to say that. That's why I think Pax's example of carnival is a true reflection. One doesn't need to describe that anymore, and it's defining that. People are coming and engaging with carnival because that's their sign of wanting to be together.
But there's a big lesson, isn't there, it seems to me, for other areas of practice, that is the case with carnival, that people already kind of are engaged to come, because it's about, again, what the nature of the invite and the welcome is.
Yeah, and this is what Liz said earlier in the panel. When Liz was sitting on the floor, she was talking about who are we learning, who's teaching who?
Yeah.
Who can we learn from? You know, we have some brilliant individuals, artists, networks, organisations in this room, online, throughout the rest of the country. But who is teaching who, and where can we learn from? We can learn from, you know, those communities that we're trying to work within. You know, that's the conversation that is exciting.
And I think it's important also to notice that a lot of these practices, outdoor art, circus, carnival, happen in those informal spaces where people don't have a threshold anxiety about crossing. A lot of the kids that we work with, the people that engage with our work, we move between theatres and non-traditional spaces. The people that we meet in non-traditional spaces tend not to be people who will have gone to any of the established cultural venues in the locality that we're working in. Anecdotally, I've heard a lot of stuff around people not feeling that they are worried about what the experience will be, because they know where we're performing and they can understand what the offer might be.
But then that's an argument altogether, isn't it, about you know, art that takes place particularly in public spaces, which is about the fact that it can make you see the extraordinary in the everyday, but it also takes place probably in your park, down your street.
But you see, Lynn, the other thing is that many of the audiences that we're serving, specifically us, is they've crossed borders, both visible and invisible. You know, their parents have crossed borders. My 9-year-old daughter's grandfather, my father, crossed an imaginary border. What do I say to my 9-year-old? How do I, you know, so it's really interesting, having taken my 9-year-old daughter and seeing the moment where Amal appeared in Somerset House, and then going on the train home saying, your grandfather crossed a border. You know, your grandfather travelled across a continent. You know, it means something to you. Where's the legacy of the work, the brilliant work that happened with the work that some brilliant people did with Amal? How do we embed that in? Because we spend lots of money on these public moments, and then what happens next? As Liz was saying, we make the next thing, and then the next thing. But it's just taking stock of these big things that have a political, social, artistic, cultural meaning. And when all of that comes together, and all of you, those of you here in front of us, those of you online, my colleagues on the panel, we'll all have examples of these things when all of these big things come together.
That's a really, really brilliant point. Liz, you wanted to come in.
There's something about the visibility and invisibility of people, which, and I've just been thinking about Manchester Day and the borders that exist, as Kully mentioned, between Smethwick and city centre Birmingham. That was a difficult crossing, and kids in North Manchester who have never been into the city centre and take part in a parade, and then I was sort of thinking about the notion. Hang on, have I lost it? Because I'm old and my representation. Oh, yes, the idea that by becoming visible for one day and taking part in the parade, we attract the attention of the people who want to make the city centre sexy and want to invest in these things. And we need that investment. But then are we, you know, the co-opted question, to what extent are these moments of togetherness and really important visibility then becoming part of a calendar of events in the city, and are we, then they've become mainstream, and is that okay? Because people want then there to be more of them, and so there's more investment, but we lose that proper political moment of visibility.
But isn't that just about who's in control of the resource to make decisions about what that event is, fundamentally? Like, it's great to have the space, and we all know that the people with the most cultural capital do better in society. You know, that there are some people who are really ready to claim that space. Being able to hold that space and kind of shift the power of who is controlling what art is made in that moment and in that time is fundamentally what we need to be thinking about.
I mean, Alicia, I would think you would be very interesting to talk about this because of Culture Liverpool.
Yeah, and plus we've been on that journey. I think you've said it in your opening speech, you know, kind of with the giants and going down streets. And I think it's how we look at that. So it's balancing that economic impact of a big event and actually where the funding's coming from and kind of what the impact it's having on the city and wanting to bring, and I said it before, bringing visitors in, but also it's about how a city, people who live in that city really embrace that event. And I think we've done it well, you know, and I've been here a long time, so I come from Liverpool, so you understand how people tick as well, really. I think that's important to have that personal thing and have that belief in it. But, you know, on all the times with the giant spectacular, the trilogy that was, you know, we were in the north of the city to begin with, and all of those experiences, and again, the spectacle's fabulous, but actually listening to people and children waking up, seeing the giant wake up is just, and that's what makes it meaningful and important. And actually the dramas that go behind the scenes with creating all these pieces, the people who come to see this work are the most important. You know, and we did to the south. And it's that thing, people go, we never really see this. And actually it's about having that balance of that. We do need to have things in the city centre. And I think this is a moment of an opportunity, and we're talking about, you know, community art or whatever it was, or whatever, all the journeys that we've been on. But actually, things should not go back to what they used to be anyway. We should be changing and thinking about how the work that we do can really develop. And actually, people have stayed in neighbourhoods. The city centres are still suffering, so we've got to reimagine city centres and how we use them. And do we have, you know, more creative spaces? Is there a creative space for Carnival to be actually used within a city centre that people can see that and visitors will see it? But then actually, how do we work with neighbourhoods? And if we're regenerating these spaces all the time, that's where people live, then how are we also bringing that creative output to them? I think that's really important, and we're doing that quite a lot. I mean, in the city, we're looking at all our policies, and one of the main things is we're looking at what is a next generation neighbourhood, and that is really important to us. And that's the whole offer, in a sense, really. What makes a place? And obviously it's the people, but then everything else that comes around that, really. So it is really important. It's hard to balance that, and we do need to have, I'm going to stop in a minute, but is that kind of sparkle in the city centre and those big major events, but how it really embraces the city and the voice of the city and the story of the city. And behind most of those big events have always been a story of a city.
Right. Pax, did you want to come in?
I was going to say, last time we were together, we went to opera together. Do you remember that?
Oh, gosh, I know. What was that?
We were judging a Circus Awards, and then I think
yes.
it's...
Yes.
No, just did the thing, but that's not what I was going to say. I was going to talk...
Randomly.
It's like
Do you want to swap phone numbers?
No, I'm just going to your point about the wow factor. Who actually says it's a wow factor? And also your point about funders understanding what goes on. When you go in Carnival, right, I'll tell you something. The wow factor is like the stuff I just give an example, which she did in the Millennium Stadium, where it was this massive fireworks and, you know, the scribers holding their stuff and so on. For the funder, for the people running the city, that's wow factor. Now, when you come to Carnival, there's a parent who comes and joins in, because the Carnival is all about mass camps. People come every week with their kids, and then they get together. They do all the tea thing and so on, dumpling and all that. And then they make this costume. The mother will make a costume that's nowhere near what Ali Pritch would make or Mahogan would make. They're just using gatho tape, joining together. When they finish, for the mother, that's a wow factor. Then the funder puts somebody to judge that. Yeah. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say.
That feeling like we often talk about spectacle as creating the wow factor, but what we're actually talking about is that moment of awe, that moment where you kind of come together quite often collectively and you see something different, something's revealed to you collectively that wasn't there before. And that can be, sometimes it's fireworks, sometimes it's a giant puppet walking through your streets that carries a story with it that's been collected through the whole of Europe. And sometimes it's the fact that you made this, that your community made this.
I mean, I think there's a point, isn't there, sort of around that, which is about, you know, we talk about that idea that if we build it, they will come. But actually, if we build it together, you know, they will stay, actually.
I think sometimes also it's about if you build a meaningful story around it that people actually embrace, they will come. It's very rarely just the fireworks.
No. And again, I think that's very clear in Liverpool, that exactly it's about building a story about, which is very different actually from the perhaps the story that the media has often told about Liverpool, and instead it's about a story that this is who we are. And I think that, you know, to some degree, you think of Liverpool and you think of, you know, of two great football clubs, and people also think a city in which culture is embedded and through which people tell the story of themselves. How, though, do you absolutely kind of ensure somehow that idea and support the sort of the fact that it is the citizens, it is the people who are involved who have the power when making the work and making the projects?
I think it's important. You said something earlier, I read about also that, you know, the people creating the work, they have to have in their mind, the people are going to be part of it. I personally, for me, when we're talking about wow factor, the most wow factor I saw, which actually represents what the artist was thinking, was what Dan Boyle did. He did something in the, it was in Millennium Stadium anyway, isn't it? We did also in English. Yes, the Olympics. For me, I actually respected that artist because he actually did something which, and I saw that it relates to what I'm involved in. So if artists can actually build things like that and be encouraged to do that, then I think, you know, we'll get somewhere.
Did you want to? Oh, Liz,
you go.
No, I think sometimes it can be kind of quite messy and complicated. I think Kully was pointing to this earlier, but the idea that there is a space of artists and there's a space of community. So I'm working as an artist, but you know, right now I'm working on a cultural program that is in Lewisham, and that's where I grew up. I grew up in that community. I'm part of that community. I'm also a professional artist. And we're creating a cultural program that wants to make sure that everybody feels like they can have a moment in that year where they can be an artist themselves. So we have all of these kind of really clear definitions, and kind of the more we work in culture, the more we kind of circulate in these spaces, we build an understanding and a specialisation that somehow creates a boundary between us and the people that we're meant to be serving and working with. And how do you break down those boundaries? How do you kind of find a common ground where I can come in and bring my expertise, but value that expertise and understanding of the people that I'm interacting with, and we can create something that is more than the sum of its parts, you know, that doesn't dissipate the expertise I bring, because I've spent my life, not all my life, about half my life working as an artist before I was doing something else. And there's a value to what I bring to that space, but it is not held above the value of what the other people that I'm engaging with bring to that space.
Yeah, really crucial. Liz?
I think that we need to think about the success. We need to learn from the successes of creative people and place initiatives that have been really looking at how to connect citizens to the art making process and end product. There's loads of great examples. And then I think any of us that are involved in budgets around festivals need to be thinking about how we allocate those resources. So rather than spending all the money on the on the shows, you put a line in the budget which is your future producers line, and that is a budget that is about growing some producers that are there. And you put money in to, and I know I shouldn't even be the one that's writing the budget exactly. So then you give them. Is that what Vicky's going to say?
No. What I was going to say. No, I'll let you finish. And I'll
So
say.
that thing of, and then how quickly can those future producers, future programmers, future people making the festival, not be us but be them, and what do they need to do that well?
I'm really glad that you said, how can we make sure they be them? Because I think one care that we have to take around developing communities or developing future producers is that we're not assimilating them into the existing culture, and we're allowing them to define what is the future culture that we don't even probably know.
I think that's so important. I mean, I think often in the arts, a lot of kind of, particularly around diversity, it says we put this person in as an assistant director in the room, and the room is entirely white. And,
Well, also, you know, there's a massive the increase in other NPOs getting in touch with me in the last 3 or 4 months. You know, subgroups, sustainability groups, diversity groups. Hey Ajay, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. And then I have to, phone calls, text, just thinking people are jumping back on this kind of systematic bandwagon. And Vicky's point is really important. You know, the jobs that our children will be doing today don't even exist. We hear that mantra again and again. You know, we could say this 10 years ago with jobs in the service industry, jobs in the tech industry. So it's really important, I think, just to take stock of not putting too much definition, and also just going back a few points and a few panel discussions earlier about definitions. You know, these definitions just being really stepping back. You know, and in the time that we've got really today, it's more about the big conversations, the big broader conversations. You know, working out the nitty gritty is tough. You know, and those need smaller conversations with. Longer conversations with smaller groups, but it's the big conversations. You know, it's putting the cat amongst the pigeons, so to speak.
I was just going to support what AJ said, because I'm also on the front line in terms of Carnival. So most people come to me, they want a funding application, they want a black group, this and that and so on. That's been part of what I do since I was in the Arts Council. But as soon as Black Lives Matter came about, my phone didn't stop ringing. Everybody wants me on their board, they want me on this and want me on that and so on. So again, it's just like really, trying to, I think some of us will try to take advantage of the situation, but sometimes it could be really quite daunting.
And I'm sure, it's done with grace, it's done with honesty, it comes from an honest place. But I think we're all going on different journeys, and we're all engaging with these big political changes in different ways. And it's just worth us reminding each other. I think that's,
I think one of the other things that I was thinking about in here, and things that we do, sometimes, we're all talking to each other here, and kind of we need to be reaching out and talking to others and different partners, and this findings needs to be cascaded to other people as well, really, because there's a lot of learning to be had, and we underestimate kind of our own background and what we can offer, and how we can actually jump into other areas of work, sometimes. And I think that's important. And we shouldn't keep talking to ourselves, but we should open this up to other people so that they learn and can share that and can see where things are common.
I think that's a really, sorry to jump in. I think that's a really important point, because it takes on the other point of leadership and diversity. Because, we're speaking to ourselves. Brilliant, it's fantastic. We need to sort of reaffirm with each other, lean on each other. But also, when we look at new leadership, when we hear about, those jobs that are not yet available or haven't been created, we should be looking to other sectors. And much broader.
Okay, we've got 3 minutes, so just 3 minutes. This is to put you sort of on the spot, going down, which is, who will you talk to about this, or show the report to, or push? Can you think of somebody, some organisation, some individual who you think kind of needs to hear what we have all heard
Yeah.
today. Yeah? Vicky?
So we quite often collaborate with partners outside of the art sectors. So the libraries, we have projects that happen in care homes. We've got a 3-year project happening in care homes. We've got projects that happen outside of this community that kind of understands these conversations. So I think that will be a place where we share this report and use it to have a discussion about the shape of the projects that we do in the future in those spaces.
Brilliant, thank you.
I've already spoken to Simon about the report. I've already shared it with a number of people. And there are two extremes. My in-laws were with me this week. They live in Birmingham. They don't read or write English. They don't go to cultural events. And I spoke to them. I just kind of gave them my executive summary of David Sood and Simon's report. And that was really, really interesting, because we drag them along to some of these events that we make and create. And at the opposite end of the scale, some of the boards that I sit on, particularly the Commonwealth Foundation, I've sent it to various people that I know in the foundation who are at strategic policy level. With all the stuff that will happen this summer, I'm hoping that they've got the room and the space over the course of the next few months to read it. So people who don't and people who do.
Brilliant, thank you. Great answer. Thanks.
Mine is straightforward. It's a carnival community. I've shared this document with Nottingham Carnival, Leeds Carnival, and so on. They didn't know anything about it. So I'll be sharing it. But the other thing is, this is to go with the COVID thing where we all got stuck indoors. I didn't know what to do. Most people didn't know what to do. And I set up a TV channel, Jankani TV. Right? Yeah. So that's been really what we've been doing. So that has also been sharing information. So I'll be sharing that report on there as well.
Great. Liz?
We have sadly just come to the end of our final Creative Europe project. And there, I've been thinking about how there's we are relatively well-resourced in England to make the sort of arts that we've all been talking about, and thinking about partners that we've had in Bulgaria, in Lithuania, in Ukraine, in Cyprus and Ireland and wherever, and thinking about how to share the report with colleagues in Europe, but also beyond Europe. In Nigeria, in Ghana, through those festival management networks that exist there, because there's so much useful thinking that people can, learn from and fast track to the next. Sorry, Alicia.
Thank you.
No?
Alicia.
No. My colleagues within the Liverpool City Council in different directories, our Festival Forum group, and our other arts networks as well. And I've just taken on a different role, so I'm actually, in my role, is taken on libraries and heritage, so I will be cascading that further.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much to this panel. I think that's something that perhaps we may all think about, both in the room and online. Who will we be sharing this with? We are not quite done. I'm going to invite Simon to come up and join me here just for a quick discussion with him and David Micklem about what we might be taking away from the day. So please don't go away. But thank you very much to all of you. We're just going to clear the stage and then we will be straight on, and we will be about 10 minutes after that. Thank you. Okay, so David, perhaps, as we've not heard from you for a long time, what are some of the things, the key things, perhaps, that you would take away from today?
Okay, just checking you can hear me.
Yeah, brilliant.
Fantastic. So yeah, I think in the report offers a huge opportunity for advocacy, and I think there is a moment now, it always feels like there's a moment, but there's definitely a moment now with Let's Create to, I think, push hard to make the case that this pandemic, whilst nobody would wish the pandemic on this country and the world, it does create opportunities for work that sits out of fully ventilated spaces. And I think, you know, if there's an area of practice that best suits a kind of post-pandemic recovery, then it's definitely work that's happening outside of conventional spaces. So I think there's an advocacy opportunity here, and Lynn, it was great to hear you asking your panellists where they might share it. So yes to advocacy, but I also just wanted to say there is still work to do, and I want us all to sort of be clear-sighted about that, and not to pretend that this area of practice, that this strategy that we've got, is somehow a done deal and we just got to wait for the money to roll in from the Arts Council. There is work to do around diversity, and I think there was some interesting stuff in the chat which we didn't get a chance to hear in the wider discussion around class. You know, how do we ensure that people who look and sound like me step aside, not step away, but step aside and create more space, recognise the space that we take up, and create space for other people to step into. So there's work to do around diversity, race and class, gender, etc. And I think back to my original point around a kind of loosening of definitions and moving away from silos. I think the potential for us to unlock through Let's Create comes from collectively banging the same drum. Whether we're working in Carnival, or we're a volunteer in Mela, or we're like me, a paid professional, arts professional, working in various different sectors, we all need to be banging the same drum loudly at the same time. And I think perhaps in previous generations, we've been banging different drums. You know, the Carnival drums try to beat louder than the street arts drum, and that's been overtaken by the circus drum. We're all trying to do the same things. We're all trying to engage real people in real places in extraordinary stuff. And I think that if we can do that in partnership and hold hands together, can we hold hands and bang the drum at the same time? I'm not sure. I'm mixing my metaphors, but I think if we can all think of ourselves as trying to drive this agenda forward and hold the Arts Council's feet to the fire and say that rather than just talking the talk, let's walk the walk, and we can help you do that, then I think there's real opportunity for us here.
Yeah. I think that's very true, and I suppose, you know, I very much take your point and the point made by other people that there's still a lot of work to do in terms of diversity in race, in gender, in class. But actually, one of the things I would really take away from today would be about the fact that there is so much fantastic work which is already going on. And I think particularly within a kind of pandemic kind of context, you know, it is work which has been going on, you know, to a large degree. Our theatres and great cultural institutions have been closed, and yet this work has been going on. Simon, you know, right at the very beginning of the day was talking about the fact that you know, apart from the first 3 months of the pandemic, that this place has been open. So I find that enormously kind of cheering. And I also have been very interested about people talking about the different partnerships that they are making, whether that is a partnership with your local library or whether that is a partnership with the Highways Agency. And I think that is something that we need to be more imaginative about and far-reaching, think more broadly. Simon, what about you? What are you going to take away from today?
Well, I totally with what David's saying in terms of you know, the need to bang the same drum and to shout about the virtues of the work in its myriad forms. But I'm also I think embracing those myriad forms and the individual characteristics of all those different ways of working in Mela, in Carnival, in touring summer festival shows, in deep engagement and co-creation projects or site-specific work. And I think also we have a lot of different conversations that we can have. Yes, absolutely, the Arts Council should, as a major cultural funder in this country, should recognise the power of this work to deliver on these various agendas. I'm sure they already do, and as I said in my introduction today, that actually a lot of these big schemes that the Arts Council invested in over the last few years, Great Places, Creative People and Places, as well as other lottery funders, they all are delivering around a core of work in public space, work that's often free at the point of access, taking place in people's own spaces. So I think we can advocate to them, but there's also 100,000 different conversations we can have with the kind of partners that Lynn's talked about, that other people are talking about. I've got notes from today. I got to sound a bit like John Cooper Clarke in that poem, The Pest, if anybody knows that, if I'm not careful, because alliterating wildly, we talked about participation, we talked about partnerships, we talked about power, we talked about process. So there's a whole lot of stuff there, and I'm really intrigued as somebody who works for a space which so many different artists pass through, about the variety of different types of work that are made, and about for me, 2 P words, which are about plurality and porosity, the way that artists meet, encounter each other, ideas rub off against each other. And I think we live in a world that's not, it's not black or white. There are all these different types of project, and sometimes, the journey was a word that came up a lot in today. We're taking people on a journey. And that will be a journey, hopefully one of awe and wonder, sometimes one of crossing the kind of invisible borders that Ajay was talking about earlier, of just kind of encountering this work. But we know that the more that we can successfully champion this work, then the further it will reach into every sphere of our public life. So what I wanted to do is say, as well as beat the same drum, actually let's recognise, as I think hopefully the report does, that the power and strength of this work is in its diversity, and actually we also just need to reflect that that diversity of ideas, thinking, and people within the organisations we represent and the cultural world that we swim in.
Simon, thank you very much. I was very taken with, there was a comment on, we talked quite a lot, I think, about evaluation, and there was a comment, I think, that came through from the chat, which was about the fact that, surely part of the evaluation is about the fact that it's free at the point of delivery, and people either stay or they leave. And as we all know from much of the amazing work that we've heard about today, people stay. So listen, my only real job today is to keep things on time, and I think I've just about kind of achieved that. But before we all leave, I'd like to thank all the panellists and speakers today. I'd really like to thank everybody who is here in the room and everybody who is here live with us online. I'd like to thank Arts Council England for their support of this event and for the work of 101, the Greenham Trust for continued support of 101, and all the team at 101 for their hard work in making this event possible and providing the delicious soup. And especially Danielle Corbishley, who is head of 101 and Outdoor, who is here. So that's great. And also, the thing that brought us together today was, of course, the report. So thank you to all the authors of the report, the contributors to the report, the proofreaders of the report, the editors and the interviewees, and also to Sood Basu, Bill Gee and Belinda Kidd for their input into the event. So thank you all for coming, and let's, this is just the start of the conversation. Let's think of all the ways to keep it going. Yeah.
And can I not let us leave without thanking the wonderful Lynn Gardner for coming so far to be with us today and so ably chairing this session, and such a wonderful, rambunctious set of panellists, and keeping that discussion flowing and vibrant through the day. So thank you very much, Lynn.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.